and welcome to today's conversation, which is the concept of freedom, particularly apt given our current global circumstances. All over the world, we're in varying degrees of lockdown, and in my country, we are experiencing a hardcore lockdown. In my country, our lockdown restricts us from purchasing household appliances, restricts us from walking our pets or our animals, from walking in public spaces, and even purchasing or the sale of alcohol and tobacco products is forbidden. And so a lot of groups are lobbying against this. A lot of groups are questioning how far our civil liberties have been restricted. First Amendment of the United States Constitution, freedom of movement, freedom of association. However, undeniably, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. That is not even disputable. And common sense dictates that, of course, one would relinquish certain freedoms for a greater good. That's common sense and not under dispute. However, it does raise the question of what exactly is freedom? And I would like to suggest today that those who have perceived freedom in what I'm going to call an external perception are suffering the most. The idea that freedom is an experience where I am perhaps even above the law. I can do as I please, when I please, with whom I please, irrespective of the consequences, because I'm free to do so. That sort of freedom can be removed in a heartbeat through various circumstances. It could be removed through a physical disability, a physical ailment, an unexpected illness. That sort of freedom could be removed through a stock market crash or simply your own business not quite panning out. Or it could be removed through a global pandemic. And so when you define freedom that way, it becomes a challenge when those freedoms are indeed restricted. One might suggest that it is an immature perspective. It is a perspective that also drives us to a pattern of behavior of greed and consumerism, because the more I have, the more freedom I have. And yes, there is a place, and it is valid, that when you have access to greater wealth or more resources, in a sense, you do have more freedom. You can travel, you can have more leisure time, you can explore different hobbies and different life experiences that you are not able to explore if you do not have access to wealth or to resources. That is true in a specific context. However, if we're driven by this notion that in order to be free, I have to have resources, I have to have access to wealth, I have to have position and status, then we're in a very dangerous position of the following belief. And the belief goes that because I am powerful, and however you want to describe power, because I have wealth, because I have a particular title or a job description, because I am powerful, I'm free. And I'd like to challenge you today to say the absolute antithesis of that is in fact the definition of freedom. Because I am free, I am powerful, irrespective of my circumstances. Because I am free, I am powerful. So how can I be free then if I'm not in a position to access resources? Let me give you the example of two of our greatest characters, personalities, souls in the past century. Those being Nelson Mandela on Robben Island and Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps. These two men considered themselves free. They considered themselves not bound to social structures and the conventions and the norms of the day. They knew that in order to survive, they had to make certain decisions, and their options were severely limited and severely hampered by external circumstances. And yet within themselves remaining true to their own moral compass, to their own North Star, if you will, gave them the freedom to honor their soul, gave them the freedom to express and live out their life purpose, irrespective of the cost, irrespective of the cost to their freedoms. And so I look at the example because nowhere does the concept of freedom become more clearly expressed in the teenage years, where suddenly this human being wants to express themselves, wear what they choose to wear, do their hair as they'd like to, associate with whomever they choose to. And we can begin to observe where we can give them the power to begin to explore what this means. Does freedom mean disregarding the laws and the norms that I've grown up with, or the context of my family situation? Just some thoughts to dwell over. A guideline for me is something that I came across in a good book, which suggested that all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. All things are permissible. What an awesome concept of freedom. All things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. In that moment, it gives us the freedom to choose, to say, I can eat whatever I like. There may or may not be a consequence to that, but is it beneficial for my body, for my health, for my state of well-being, for my energy levels, and even for long term? I'm free to indulge in any of the excesses. There's no judgment. There's no random line of morality here. I am free to do this. It is permissible. But is it going to be beneficial? Is it going to honor my soul? Is it going to take me a step further towards that which matters? That which ultimately defines my contribution to this world, to this lifetime, to myself, to my family. And so we place certain restrictions upon ourselves. And you might want to call that term discipline. Internally imposed discipline rarely sets you free. Internally imposed discipline, where I make a decision to indulge in certain choices and to refrain from other choices, still means I'm free, because at any point in that process, I can change my mind. At any point in that process, I can choose otherwise, and I can do differently. So I am the master of my own universe, and I am the master of my own actions. However, would it be beneficial? Would it be most beneficial to what I ultimately want? That, of course, begs the question, what do I ultimately want? That's a discussion for another day. And in that moment, when you have this intrinsic definition of freedom, that's when you get to make these amazing life-defining choices. You may be in a career that is excessively lucrative and gives you status, wealth, and ego, and all sorts of things. And you may just find that it is simply draining your life energy, that it doesn't contribute to your soul's purpose. And so you can walk away from that very easily when you have not defined freedom by material possessions. You may be in a relationship that is either abusive, or perhaps not necessarily abusive or necessarily negative, but simply can no longer further your growth. And you can step out of that relationship without a moral dilemma. Perhaps you are a monk who might sell your Ferrari. These are the decisions that people in general in society find rather incredible and amazing, but they are driven by souls who have understood the internal concept of freedom, where freedom is not dependent on your circumstances, on restrictions that society may impose on you, or on material possessions. But freedom ultimately boils down to the fact that I always have choice. As minimal as that choice may be, there is still a choice. And thus, we honor those like Gandhi, Mandela, and Viktor Frankl, who understood these concepts. And as a last point on today's thoughts, we do need to take into consideration that because we are co-creators, and never has that become more obvious or more demonstrable than in this current global pandemic, we are all in this together. So my choices and my freedoms impact on yours. And so I do need to take into consideration that perhaps there is somewhat of a concept of my freedom ends where yours begins, or the concept of the eagle is free to soar, but still needs the fish. And so we are all very interdependent on one another's choices. And so when we're making those choices, we need to consider that ecologically, we are dependent on one another as well. Fiona D'Souza, Shekhinah Wellness Centre.